Okay, so how do you do an intro?
I don't know.
Part of the issue is that we don't have a real name for what we're doing.
What should we call this?
So far, it's been called, Phil and Luke Talk?
Luke and Phil Talk. It's alphabetical.
Oh. Okay, let's just try something
we can
here.
always cut it in post.
That's true. Hi, I'm Luke.
I'm Phil.
Okay, Phil. We've lived in Japan and China, respectively. Here are some of our experiences about the thing I just said. A+. That's what I give myself. In history, they will look upon this moment and say, here's how you do an intro. Masterpiece, as they say. Okay, today's topic is public transportation.
You don't want to try that again.
Why would I need to try it again?
I want one more pass at this.
Okay. Hi, I'm Luke.
And I'm Phil. And we're going to talk about our experiences living abroad in Japan and China, respectively.
Sounds good. Today's topic is trains and other forms of transportation that are not trains.
Trains, you say?
Yes.
What are trains? I live in America now. I don't know what this is. Actually, no, that's completely false. I live half a block from the train track, and every time a train goes by, or like a freight train, my whole house rattles. My house shakes. I'm afraid things are going to like fall off the shelves. They haven't yet, but my iMacs sitting on my desk will wobble, like very, very scarily wobble on my desk, and trains are terrifying.
They are scary, especially in the US.
But not in Japan?
Actually, what I want to start off with is I have ridden a passenger train in the United States, long distance.
Wow.
From, where did the train even start? The middle of nowhere in Minneapolis, probably. And I got off at a small station in the middle of Wisconsin. And I have also ridden a train in Germany, and I've ridden trains in Japan, and it was easily the worst experience riding a train, or maybe any public transit, in my entire life.
In riding the one in the States?
Yes, riding a train in the United States is awful. So going wasn't terrible, but it was kind of like the people working there were sort of aggressive. And we're just like, get on the train, whatever, I don't care. And so I got on, and that was fine. But going back, the train was delayed, so I got an email while I was waiting for the train that said, the train's been delayed.
Okay.
And I was like, okay. So they don't tell you when it's going to arrive now. They don't tell you how long you're going to have to wait for. So I just had to wait at the train station at like midnight until the train finally showed up like 5 or 6 hours late. I barely made it back home on time to get to school on Monday morning. And there was no compensation for the fact that they ran like 6 to 10 hours late. They did, however, say they hoped that I would ride with them again. Amtrak. Wow. So that was my experience riding trains in the United States. And that was a huge shock because that was after I had studied abroad in Japan and had ridden trains there, and trains in Japan are glorious. You walk up to the machine, you look at the map, and you say, where do I want to go?
Which machine is this?
So outside of every station, there are these kiosks where you can buy tickets, and above them there's a big map. And usually they even have the words of the stations in English. And then you just look at the map and you say, I want to go to Akasaki Station. And so then you find Akasaki Station and it says, that's 440 yen. So then you go into the machine, you press 440 yen, it gives you a ticket. You stick the ticket in the ticket machine as you walk through, it gives it back. You climb on the train you want to get on, and then you get off and you stick the ticket back in. The trains are almost always on time. No one, yells at you. If trains are late, they tell you when they'll get there anyway, and they tell you how long you're waiting for. But I've only seen trains late, twice, and usually it's because it's typhooning or snow or something. There's just something great about riding trains here.
It sounds more like a flying experience in a way.
Yeah, it's like flying without security. If you didn't have to go through airport security or check bags, You just walk to your departure window, you walk on, you sit down on the plane, they take off whenever they said they were gonna, and then you get there. It's pretty cheap. I won't say that it's like free or anything, but in Osaka, at least, I could go from Osaka to nearby Kyoto and back for like 15, 20 bucks. And,
How far of a distance is that? Do you know offhand?
But that is 60 kilometers.
Okay.
Or so. So that's, 35 miles?
Mm.
Yeah, so that's the other thing about traveling in Japan is trains are quite fast relative to the other forms of transportation you can do. Aside from flying, you pretty much are guaranteed to get somewhere faster by taking a train, which is also very nice. I will say that living out in the middle of nowhere, trains are less convenient. I live in western middle of nowhere Tottori prefecture, so it costs as much for me to go from my little town to a big city as it would in Osaka to go from Osaka to Kyoto and back. So there is that, but it is nice to be able to get around even if you don't necessarily want to drive there or you just want to be able to be on your feet, not find a place to park. I can make it to Osaka from here in maybe 2 hours for probably $40 or $50, but that's mostly because you have to ride a special high-speed train to get there.
That was going to be my next question. As an American living somewhere where there aren't trains, again, the propaganda all of the Americans hear about Japan is they have high-speed rail systems. So you kind of assume, if you aren't familiar with it, that every train in Japan is a high-speed rail train.
Right. I would say most trains are not high-speed rail trains. Basically, there's like this rating system. So you got your slow trains, your special trains, your fast trains, your really fast trains, and then your Shinkansen trains. And each of them stop at a progressively fewer number of stops. When I went with Haley to Osaka by train, once we got onto the Shinkansen train, we made like maybe 6 or 8 stops between Kurayoshi City and Osaka, which is like probably 200 kilometers. But to get there, we made like probably 4 or 5 stops on the slow train. It really depends. You have to pay attention to which speed level. And anything above like a special train is going to cost you extra just to ride it. Which was a big shock for me coming here because I was trying to get to Tottori slowly, just riding slow trains and stuff. And then I was sitting in one of the trains and they were like, at our next stop, the train will be like stopping for good and you'll have to have a special ticket to continue onwards towards your destination. And I was like, I don't have that ticket. So I just had to get off there and figure things out. It was all okay because I eventually was able to buy a specialty ticket and ride the next train like an hour and a half later. But it's something to watch out for.
Yeah. Help me visualize all of this then. You have a train station and you're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So where does the train go? What are the stops? Like, it doesn't take you around town.
No. Basically, out here, every small township area will have at least one stop. They're about maybe 2 miles apart out here. And there's pretty much just one track for most of the way. So when you ride the slow trains, you'll end up stopping at a lot of stations and just waiting for the fast trains to pass you and then continuing on. But yeah, trains are basically an intercity travel system here. For getting around in cities, they mostly use buses, taxis, and cars. Cars are actually really big in Western Japan.
Really? Big as in size or big as in a lot of people use them?
Just using them. They are quite small. If you imagine an American car and then you imagine a toy Hot Wheels car, it's somewhere in between those, about halfway.
Can you describe what you rode a passenger train in the United States. Can you kind of describe what that looked like interior-wise? And then could you compare and contrast that to the interiors of the trains in Japan and maybe Germany?
Right. So America and Germany actually had somewhat similar trains. They're kind of like tall and big and double-decker. the special passengers would ride on one floor, and then the regular people, the plebeians, would ride on the other floor. That made it very similar to, like, it made it closer to, like, riding an airplane in terms of, like, seating and stuff. It felt very, like, you get in, you strap yourself in, and then you hope the train doesn't crash. But in Japan, they have some benches on the sides, but it's more like a bus almost. They got places to grab onto that are entirely too low for me and too small for my hands, but they have them. Out where I am, in general, the trains are what they like to call one-man cars. I switched languages in the middle there.
Yeah.
One-man car. So single-man cars, because they have a single person operating them, I guess, and they're just two cars attached to each other, and you're supposed to get in on the back end and then get out on the front end, but nobody follows those rules. And it's pretty much like riding a bus that doesn't have as much seating.
Okay.
Occasionally there will be one that has front and back seats throughout, but I don't know how they distribute those, because sometimes you'll get on the train and they won't have that. They'll all be benches, and sometimes they will. And in general, this is slightly changing topics, but there's sort of a bunch of social rules for riding on trains. In America, it sort of felt like flying, where you basically should be silent and reading or something and passing the time that way. On trains in Japan, it's more like pretty much everyone's reading something on their phones, but there are signs towards the end of each car that say, please don't use your phone if anyone's sitting in the specialty seating area for the elderly and pregnant people and people with heart conditions, because people with heart conditions, I guess, can be affected by radio waves from phones. I don't really know how true that is. But one time, while I was on my phone, standing around a bunch of other people on their phones, a guy came over to me and asked me to stop using my phone, please, because he had a heart condition, maybe. And so I said, okay. And then I just stopped. It was a very strange experience, because there's part of me that's like, why am I the one being singled out here when everyone else is also on their phones? And then there's part of me that's like, should I really be complaining if someone's worried about their heart condition? That I don't know.
So you mentioned when you were riding from Osaka to Tottori, I think you said there was a train, a faster train, special train, about an hour later.
Yeah.
How often do trains run?
Right. Out here, you're probably going to get one every half an hour or less often. Some of the bigger stations will have fast trains stop at them, and so they get quite a bit more often stops. But for smaller stations, you'll basically get one an hour. So you gotta plan accordingly. And they close down around maybe 10 p.m. here and start up around 4 a.m.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty awful. I'm surprised that even the amount of riders there are is so few that I feel like they don't actually make money on trains here. They just do them because it sort of creates a cohesive train system.
Mm-hmm.
That's the feeling I get, especially since it's operated by JR West, which I believe is a government-owned company. Oh, okay. I guess JR is a for-profit company that took over the Japan National Railways in 1987.
Oh.
Interesting. I did not know that. So I guess it is now a private rail system. So I'm a little surprised that they can keep things open. There are stations that are shutting down in Western Japan. Haley and I went to a special light show in the winter in the mountains, partly because the train station there was shutting down after this year. So tell me a bit about Chinese trains.
Okay. I rode a train from Beijing to Zhuhai. It's down near Guangzhou and Shenzhen.
Isn't that like 1,000,000 miles?
It is a 10-hour train ride.
Do they have like food cars on that?
They do.
That's cool.
I think we got up at like 3 in the morning or something, or 4 in the morning, so we could be to the train station by 5 or 6 and have it. We bussed to the train station in Beijing and waited there in a kind of a little wait area. It felt very much like an airport. They actually did have security to kind of go through, but it wasn't a lot. I think it was a metal detector. And I believe we were second class from there to Guangzhou and then first class the rest of the way.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah, well, we had to switch trains. So we stopped in
okay.
Guangzhou to get on a different line and do the last little leg of the journey. And in many ways, it felt like being on the most spacious, glorious airplane I've ever been on. Because the seats are wide. You have a lot of space to put your bags. And we had like roller luggage coming along. They had overhead stuff. It was 2 people to a seat on either side with an aisle in the middle. I think it was 2. I don't think it was 3. I have photos somewhere. I'm pretty sure it was 2. And it was a decently fast train. It wasn't a super slow train because it's quite a long hike down there. But there was a food car, and I did order a little meal in a plastic thing that they heated up for me. It was okay. It wasn't great food, but I didn't have to deal with any of the ticket purchasing or anything like that.
So were there a lot of people on that train? Was it like did it seem like it was like a common thing to be riding that train, or was it like a special?
It was full. It wasn't crowded. I know Asia is somewhat infamous for their super crowded trains at times. The second leg of our journey, it was just maybe an hour and a half to get from Guangzhou to Zhuhai. There were people standing in kind of the aisles, and I guess you can buy tickets that are just for standing if you don't want to buy a ticket for sitting in a seat. During national holidays, apparently it's still common for trains to be just full of people to the point where like even the small little squatty potty and little bathroom space is like full, standing room only.
Gross.
It's like there's people everywhere. But I never had to deal with that.
Well, that's good. Probably improved your experience.
Yeah, no, my experiences on trains has been pretty positive. I did ride the Shinkansen in Japan from Osaka to Tokyo. And I will say that train ride was very smooth.
Yeah.
Like that one, you felt like you're just gliding over the tracks. And when I rode a train later afterwards, and you're on other tracks that maybe don't have quite the same tolerance, like there is that side to side motion, and you're like, oh, this is a lesser quality train track.
Yeah, the Shinkansen's something special.
Buying tickets for a train and just to travel around the city in Osaka and Tokyo, I really loved the kiosks. Like, I guess I even found that in Tottori, that one. You have all those little kiosks for buying tickets. That was great. I always had to either buy a ticket in person or on my phone for my few trips in China that I was on a train.
Oh, so they don't do kiosks?
There was no real kiosk there, and I don't know if that's just because of the system or just because of how they do things. I am assuming it's just kind of how they don't have the infrastructure.
Not gonna lie, I think having to interact with someone to ride a train would ruin the experience for me.
Yeah, I mean, well, especially when I don't speak the language and I'm like, I want to go to this area, and it's like, I've already paid for it on my phone. Like, I need this. I'm trying to show them the QR code or whatever it is on my phone, so they give me the ticket. And the first one, they just gave it to me, and the second time I did it, they charged me five kwai. So I don't know what that was about.
They got you.
I think because, again, to go from Zhuhai to Shenzhen, you take the train from Zhuhai to Guangzhou and then Guangzhou to Shenzhen. And so I picked up both tickets at the same time coming back. And I think it cost money to do them both at once. But they didn't really speak any English, and I didn't really know how to ask. So.
Right. I actually had when Haley and I went to Tokyo, we had a bit of a struggle with the only time we've had an actual struggle with the train system. We came off of the tracks somewhere underground, and we started walking towards the place we wanted to switch to trains to. And I was like, oh, there's some kiosks here. Let's buy some tickets. So we bought some tickets, and I went through, and it was fine. And then Haley tried to go through, and it didn't let her quite right. Or, like, it let her, but it made a weird noise. And we were like, that's weird. But you have the ticket, so let's just go. So then on the other end, it wouldn't let us through. And so I went over to the station employee, and I was like, did we do something wrong? Because it's not letting us through. And he was like, You bought tickets for the other train station, for the other rail line. This isn't a JR ticket. This is a Tokyo Metro ticket or something. And I was like, oh, shoot. Can we, like, exchange that? Or can we buy those tickets? He was like, let it go. Go through. Whatever. I was like, you must deal with a lot of tourists.
When I was going back from Tokyo to Osaka, I had bought a ticket, and I had paid for a JR thing ahead of time. I thought, but I guess it didn't cover the expensive tickets, which I kind of assumed. But on the way back, whatever ticket I bought, when the guy came through to check the tickets, there was something about my ticket he didn't like.
Were you sitting in a green car and you didn't have a green car ticket?
It's possible. No one spoke English, and they tried to talk to me in Japanese, and I was like, I don't know. I'm just here. I don't know what to do, and I don't know any Japanese. And eventually, he just let me go. But I think I was in the wrong spot.
Yeah. Usually Shinkansen and maybe other cars have like 2 or 3 places, or 2 or 3 cars that are like green cars. I don't know if they're green because you have to pay money for them or what, but they usually have more seating than the other places, and it's like reserved seating, so you know that you get a seat, because I have ridden a Shinkansen that was full and I had to stand, and that was no fun. Don't recommend.
I have always been impressed with the service of the people who are down by the tracks pointing you in the right direction, both in Japan and China. Like, if you're wandering around lost, there are people whose job it is to point you in the right direction, and that is a type of service I don't think I've ever seen anywhere else.
Yeah, America doesn't do that kind of service super well. I think our individuality and our desire for freedom of speech restricts our ability to do that properly.
Definitely seems likely. We're talking a little bit about trains and about Tokyo and Osaka. Is there a difference, and what is it between the train and then the subway or metro system within the city? Are those the same thing?
In general, train lines are operated by big train companies. There's a couple exceptions. Haley and I rode a train in Tokyo that was owned by a really small train line, which was kind of surprising. But in general, it's like 2 or 3 train companies own all the train lines, and they're sort of interprovincial. So JR owns the line between Osaka and Tokyo, but the Tokyo Metro, I believe, is owned by the Tokyo City or Tokyo Metro Company or something. Usually the metro lines are very far underground. Haley and I one of those stops was at least 4 stories underground.
Oh, wow.
And getting out of it was horrible because we didn't see an elevator. But other than that, they're so similar in quality and like form that if you weren't paying close attention, I don't think there's any like actual differences between riding one of them. If you aren't paying attention, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between riding a JR train and a metro transit vehicle. I'm sure some train people would be glad to tell me how wrong I am about that. But you rode a train in Korea. How did that compare? Because you've now ridden trains in 3 major East Asian countries.
Yeah, I rode on a train from one airport to the other airport because I thought it would be a fun idea to fly into one airport and out of the other airport at 7 a.m. the first time I ever flew outside the U.S. That was a mistake, but it all worked out really well. So I rode on a very sleek, modern, kind of like a subway car. There were benches along the side and places to stand in the middle. It almost kind of felt like a tram might if you were going at an airport between places, except there was a little bit more seating. Mm-hmm. And I really liked that. That was like a 20-minute ride between the 2 airports, and that was pretty good. A year ago when I was in Seoul, I rode on their kind of metro system, which is more kind of a subway rail system.
Right.
Those were huge, boxy rail cars. You could fit a lot of people on them. They had really tall ceilings, and the ceilings went up on the sides and then straight over. They felt a little bit like Japanese in style like that. I guess probably wrong for me to say it this way. But, you think of your boxcar It was kind of like a boxcar with windows and seats along the side, and then places to stand in the middle. A lot of metro subway cars are seats on the sides facing in, and then poles and places to hold in the middle. And so it was a version of that, and it was very wide, very utilitarian, and very square.
Interesting.
I remember visiting you in Totori. The trains were kind of colored on the inside. There's maybe pink or green or something. And some of those they were probably bigger than those train cars in some way. At least that's the way it felt to me. And I was never on any that were really full. Probably
mostly for rush hour.
Yeah.
Because one thing Japan actually struggles with is rush hour traffic in big cities like Tokyo. I don't remember. I think it's Shinjuku Station gets some million people every day traveling through it. And so at rush hour times, they basically pack people in until they're pretty much spilling out, and then a train conductor or platform conductor pushes people in and then closes the doors to make sure nobody slips out or tries to cram in even further. And then they block people off. That actually develops this weird culture where there's this set of salarymen, office workers, who have been doing this for 20, 30 years and are jaded about it, who are really aggressive and pushy. And so when you think of Japanese culture, you're yes, they're polite, they bow, and there's that small subset of salarymen who will try to push you out of the way so they can get on the train and hopefully get a seat if they run fast enough. It's a little bit of an eye-opener if you're expecting everyone to follow the sort of stereotype of Japanese politeness.
I remember riding the subway in Tokyo on a Monday morning. That was pretty packed. It wasn't quite as packed as some other situations I've been in at this point, but it was quite packed. The subway in Seoul very much just felt like a train to me, because mentally I have this distinction now where it's here's a train and here's kind of the subway and just kind of the shape, because even the Shinkansen, it's kind of a rounded, it's very sleek. It feels like an airplane where maybe the ceiling kind of slopes up and around. Same with the MTR in Hong Kong, all the subway in Hong Kong. It's very sleek looking cars. They're kind of rounded tops, not nearly as big, but that's one big long train. You just walk between cars because it's just an open space.
Right.
And I don't remember Osaka quite as much. You were in Osaka a lot.
Yeah. Osaka's quite a bit like Tokyo in terms of public transit. It's got 8 million people in it. So there's a lot of rush hour traffic. I actually managed to avoid that for 4 months. I never got stuck in a car that I didn't have moving room in while I was in Osaka. But some of my friends who I studied abroad with definitely had the experience. I think you kind of have to get up early, because a lot of schools start at 7:30 or 8, so people want to get there even sooner. So if you're on the train at 6:30, 7 in the morning, you'll get crushed.
That's the rush hour.
Yeah.
Oh, in Tokyo and Osaka, you want to ride the train, you want to ride the metro. They give you little tickets, and they got a whole system for little paper tickets that get sucked into these little machines and spit out and then sucked back in when you get to your destination.
Right.
When I was in Hong Kong and Korea, we had little tap cards. In Hong Kong, it's the octopus card, which you put a balance on and then you just tap it on a thing to go through. You can, I don't know if they have paper tickets. I really don't know. And in Shenzhen, they had little plastic tokens. There's these little green plastic poker chips that are a little bit smaller than a quarter, maybe. About the size of a quarter. And you, in Japan, there was a little kiosk. You said which station you wanted to go to. You paid your money. You put your coins in the machine, and it gave you a little token. And then when you got where you're going, you just put the token in the thing, and it took it away. I actually found a token lying on the ground somewhere in a construction site and may have hopped over a short wall to grab it as a souvenir.
Interesting. In Japan, there are a bunch of brands of those cards. The one I had while I was in Osaka was the Ikoka card, which is a bit of a play on words because Ikoka means shall we go? Or let's go, shouldn't we? So it was wonderful to be able to be like, instead of having to look at the map and be like, okay, I need 440 yen, go to the kiosk, do whatever. You just tap the thing and then you have to know what direction you're going. And you just hop on a train and then tap it again on your way home. But out here, they don't do that. Most stations, aside from the really big cities, are going to have a station employee, if they're slightly bigger, who will take the ticket from you and say, "Arigatou gozaimashita." Or they'll have, if the station attendant isn't there at all, they'll have a box that says, "Throw your tickets in this thing." So if you're riding a train at night, sometimes you buy a ticket from a old kiosk, and then you hop on a train and you throw it in the trash when you get off the train. You would think there would be a lot of abuse from that, but there's so few people riding the train in the first place, I can't imagine there is much.
Yeah.
And most of the train rides are going to be like $3 or $4, so skipping it's not really there's no reason to.
Yeah, well, there's no financial burden to stop you.
Right.
Kind of wrapping up then, how do trains rate for you on a scale of transportation options? How do you rate trains?
In Japan?
Sure.
Or in general?
Both.
Okay. In general, I think trains are a great option for smaller regions. I don't think Minnesota could handle a very good public train system, because it's sort of like out here in Tottori, where no one's going to ride it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially not since the US has such great road systems. In Japan, the speed limit on even the fastest roads out here is around 70 kilometers an hour, which I want to say is like 45 miles an hour.
Yeah, it's not very fast.
So riding trains can really save you time. But in the US, when speed limits are 80 or 90 miles an hour, the train's got to be going pretty fast to be faster than driving. And it's definitely not cheaper than gas. So in the US, it's not super practical. But in Japan, in big cities, trains are probably the best form of transportation out there. You can pretty much go anywhere you want to go, as long as you're willing to walk maybe 2 or 3 miles.
Mm-hmm.
The prices are all reasonable. It's easy to get around. The station attendants are very helpful. And if you have an Ikoka card, you don't even have to deal with kiosks, so it's kind of fast. There are escalators at pretty much every station that'll take you up to the platform. That's nice. Yeah, they're wonderful. Out here in the country, I would rate them as less wonderful, but it's still definitely a valuable option relative to the United States. You won't regret riding a train, and it won't be frustrating to work with the train company in order to travel from point A to point B. So definitely better than the United States.
Yay.
But what do you think about trains?
I think I mostly agree with you. They're kind of fun. They're a fun novelty in a way because they don't use them a whole lot. In terms of big city metro subway systems, they are fantastic and I love them.
Mm-hmm.
If there was a way in the States where I could drive my car onto a train car, like just had a ramp or something, or you just drive up and park there, and then they would take me across the country and I could drive off and tootle around for a bit and then go back, I would totally do that. But I don't think that's something that's ever going to take off.
Yeah, maybe not. It's a cool idea, though.
Yeah.
I've been recording for 48 minutes.
That's plenty.
Yeah. There'll be something of value in there.
3-minute podcast.
Okay, stopping in 3, 2, 1, potato.